All right. All right, well, good evening. This is the November 11th special meeting of the Groton Planning and Zoning Commission. This meeting is a workshop that is meant to obtain input from the commission on a zoning text amendment that will lay out a permitting path for the redevelopment of the Mystic Education Center. No decisions will be made tonight. The input received from the commission will be used to create a revised draft. The preliminary text and a schematic master plan for the Mystic Education Center redevelopment were attached to this meeting's agenda packet and were available on the town's website. Comments received concerning tonight's meeting have already been forwarded to the commission, and they've been attached to the online agenda packet. During this meeting, the public can address the commission under public communications on the agenda, that portion of the meeting. You must raise your virtual hand in order to be recognized. On an Apple device, the hand can be found by hovering at the top of your screen. On a PC, you hover at the bottom. If you're calling in, you press *9. After the meeting, you can also submit comments to the commission through town staff, and you can always contact planning staff with any questions. So that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Jeff Pritchard, the chair.
Okay, I'll call the Planning and Zoning Commission special meeting to order. First item is a roll call. I see everybody but Michael Kane. I don't know if he's here or not. I guess he doesn't say anything. So I'll sit fifth to sit for Mike, even though we don't have real business. But and the next item is public communications. Does anyone in the public wish to address the commission tonight?
And remember, you need to raise your hand so that we can see that you want to speak.
Because there'll be no recognition during the meeting except for commission members.
I see someone named Scott is raising their hand, so I'm going to allow him to talk.
All right, Scott, would you please state your name and address before you speak?
Yes, my name is Scott Westervelt. I'm at 7 Boulder Court in Mystic. My question is, there seems to be a very radical change to everything that was proposed to us at the meetings before this, from last year before this whole COVID thing hit. And it looks like a lot of work was already underway. So it doesn't seem like we're being treated fairly down here, because some of the new things like a hotel and stuff like that, that just doesn't fit into the feel of a small village, which is what we were originally approached as the scope of this thing. Now it's gone almost twice as big as far as landmass goes. And we're talking about a hotel, a theater. None of that was a part of the original proposal. And I'm a bit taken aback that we haven't known more about this all along. Those are my comments.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishes to address the commission? Okay. Then we'll move on then to new business, which is Mystic Education Center zoning text amendment pre-application workshop. I guess we turn it over to Jeff Davis, or unless staff has any comments to make before we start.
I think John wants to address you first before Jeff starts.
Okay.
Yes, good evening, everybody. Again, John Reiner, Director of Planning and Development Services. And, I just want to reiterate a little bit of what Deb said initially, that we do not currently have an application for this zoning text amendment. This is a draft. This is the first draft of this amendment that we're taking to the commission to get some feedback from all of you. Since the last time we spoke about this, it was a number of months ago, we'd gotten some direction from the commission to make a zoning regulation that was specific to this property, to this area, and really thinking about this particular development. And this is our first cut at that. We want to get some feedback from all of you. And again, this is just the beginning of the process of adopting regulations, which would then allow someone, an applicant, to apply for a zoning map amendment and then to move forward with some type of a master plan process. So, we've certainly heard from some neighbors and other people around town about, hey, what's happening with this project? The developer has been working on some pieces of their own. So for example, when we last spoke with the commission, we had known that the developer was looking to acquire some abutting properties for better access, better alignment with some of the lights around the property out off on Cow Hill Road, but they didn't have those properties fully acquired or options on them yet. So that's something that we couldn't really share publicly because they were still active negotiations, but it was something that was contemplated from the very initial when we put the RFP out on this property. And kind of stepping back, we, the town, working with the state, put an RFP out on for the development of the site. We received a number of proposals, and we ended up choosing Ressler Homes as the preferred developer with a concept that they had. And over time, that concept is going to change based on engineering design and what the commission itself is looking for and what the town is looking for development in that area. So there have been, as I mentioned, some other properties, most notably the Fertileschi property across the street. I think that was around 16 acres or so that was added. And there's going to be a road that will end up going through that and tying right down into the red light down at the end of that road. I also want to mention that, when we think about the use and how we want this piece to fit into the use of the town, when the state had owned this property, they sometimes would actively use it, and we're not always looking for any of our input on the uses that they put on the property. So this is something that we, as a town, as a commission, can start defining what the uses will be and won't be for that property. I think people sometimes are, when we're thinking about the redevelopment, we need to think about what are the reuses that are happening on the site. For example, the Pratt building or the Mystic Oral School building. There's also active brownfields on the property, the dump that's there, and those buildings are in some pretty tough shape. So there's going to be a significant amount of investment that goes into those buildings in order to have them renovated. And again, we had some questions about some of the height that's being proposed. Right now, the tallest building that's on the site as it's currently proposed in the very draft master plan is the parking garage. And the developers are looking to build a parking garage so that they don't have a lot of surface level parking, but instead can have parking congregated closer to the Pratt building. So I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of an overview. Jeff Davis is from Horsley Witten, our consultant that's been working with us for some time on our zoning regulations, is going to give an overview of each one of the sections and kind of point out within the zoning regulations, there's gray boxes. I know he'll talk a little bit about this, that we're looking for some direction from the commission on each of those. And again, tonight's a workshop for the commission to hear this for the first time, give us some feedback, and then we can come back with revised draft and move ahead from there. So happy to answer any questions on what I've talked about. Otherwise, I'll hand it over to Jeff Davis.
Okay. So Jeff, I guess you're on.
Okay, great. I will attempt to share my screen. Oh, I'm told my share screen is disabled.
Oh, is that the staff has to let you?
Yes, I need permission.
Can you take care of that, Deb? Or?
Sorry, yes, I'm trying.
Oh,
If it's easier for one of you to share your screen, I can just say next slide, whichever is easier.
No, let me just hang on. There we go. I'm going to make you a co-host. That should be able to.
Oh, that looks like that worked.
Free things up.
Great. All right. Can everyone see the first slide with Mystic Education Center on it? Awesome.
yeah, that appears.
All right. So John has basically already given you this bit of background. in terms of what has been happening since March. I have not spoken with all of you since March. Again, just very briefly, the decision was made to target this specifically to the Mystic Education Center property and not be a zone that you might place elsewhere in town. And we have gone through several rounds of edits since then to get to this point today. So we didn't want to come back to the commission until we felt we had a draft that first and foremost reflected the input that we've received from you to date. Secondly, and very importantly, something that is legally defensible. Your town attorney has spent a lot of time with this and shaping this to make sure that it's legally defensible. And then finally, of course, something that accommodates the preferred developer's vision, but very importantly, without precluding other applications if this one doesn't work out. We're not trying to create zoning that is specifically targeted to this one development and will be useless otherwise. The intention is for this to be zoning that captures your vision as a town for this property. And regardless of the developer and the specific proposal, we'll get you what you want. So as John mentioned, I'm going to go more or less section by section. So with your permission, I'll go through a few slides and then pause and get your thoughts. What we're hoping for tonight, obviously this is the first time you're seeing this. We don't expect to solve everyone's issues tonight. But we hope that at the very least, we can get your first impressions and say what's on target, what feels wrong, what are areas where you want us to go back to the drawing board or where you think you'll need more time and discussion as a group to make an informed decision. So again, we won't come to all the answers tonight, but we do hope that you will be able to give us your general impressions of, yeah, that's generally the direction we were hoping for, or I don't know about that. We need to spend more time talking about this one. So the first are the purposes and the applicability. And I think the purpose statements in the current draft are very similar to what you saw in March. I think the only major difference is that it, of course, no longer specifies that the zone applies to adaptive reuse of institutional properties, because that's no longer among the purposes. Because the zone only applies to the Mystic Education Center and potentially to any adjacent parcels that the commission feels are appropriate to include. So we have given the commission the authority to review and approve additional parcels. And as John has suggested, the Respler proposal does have some adjacent properties in order to help with circulation and congestion as one example of that. One more slide and then we will pause. So the other thing that has not changed a whole lot since you last saw it were the development objectives. These are not them verbatim on the screen, but just a summary. That whatever the development is, it needs to be safe and convenient, have safe and convenient circulation for walking, biking, and driving, have a coherent mix of uses that are coordinated and not disconnected. There be an emphasis on low impact design and environmental sustainability, that we are preserving and reusing contributing structures. And I know we talked a lot about that in March, and we'll get into that later on in the presentation. Using buffers, et cetera, to protect surrounding neighborhoods. Again, we want to make sure that existing residential communities are being protected and buffered from whatever is proposed. And then finally, provide adequate roads and infrastructure. Actually, I lied. I will do one more slide and then we will pause. So just to reiterate, we have also talked about this point quite a lot, that whatever development is proposed, the onus is on the developer to make sure there is adequate water supply, sewer service, and utilities, and adequate roadway access. And that is either adequacy of existing facilities, things that are already in the works and will be completed by the time the development is finished, or something that the developer is responsible for building themselves as part of the master plan. So either way, we're going to have to make sure that those utilities and roadways are adequate. And finally, of course, that a lot of this area is within the WRPD, and so we just very explicitly call out that, hey, don't forget to go back and look at the WRPD because all of those standards apply here as well. So with that, I wanted to take a little pause and just make sure that this all seems still on track for you all.
Well, why don't we just go down the numbers and see if they have any comments. Hal, do you have any concerns with what's been presented?
Nothing yet.
Barbara?
Good.
Sue? You have any comments?
I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was on mute. One thing I'd like to know is, be interesting to know what the current developer is proposing for the lots that are part of the development. And then what areas outside of that might be potential ones that planning and zoning could add going forward. Just like the scale of the proposed versus what's potentially available to add later.
John, do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, sorry, I was hitting the wrong unmute button. Right now, what the developer has indicated on their draft master plan, those are all of the lots that they envision utilizing for the development. I don't think at this point in time they foresee any addition or growth beyond those pieces. But I think, you know, that's something as we look at that draft master plan to get a little context, I think that might come together a little bit too. You know, another thing that we did want to mention at some point tonight that I do think sometime in the near future, it would be good to set up a site visit out on the property. Deb and I were talking about that today, just to give folks a little bit of context of, you know, there is a fair amount of acreage there. There's also some substantial grade changes all over the property that really help play into the buffering, the setbacks, and I think we'll see how that all works and plays into the development.
And I think to further answer Sue's question, I think we can get a map that shows the existing property lines, and that might help you see what additional properties might be added to the project.
Yeah, that'd be very helpful. And maybe if there's some owned by Deep or whoever,
Yep.
and that are not ever going to be available,
Right.
that'd be very helpful.
Okay.
Right. Steve, do you have any comments?
Just going a little bit off of what Sue was saying, that I think there is an element that's missing, and that's talking about the scale. You know, just because we have this huge piece of property doesn't mean we have to use every square inch of it. And I think that there's, you know, just some words that should go in there that, you know, the scale of the project should be compatible with the town, with the existing resources. It's kind of danced around it a little bit, but I think there's, you know, that's something that should be an overall goal.
Yeah, if I could just add one comment to that on scale. I'm struggling with some of the applications we've seen so far with having a good idea of what the scale is. And the example I'll use would be 3 Water Street. And it's one thing to look at drawings and architectural things, or even, you know, a front view or whatever. But given this is one of, if not the largest project that's ever been proposed in Groton, and it's important we do everything right as much as possible, I think, for this. I just suggest that I think it'd be very helpful to have a scale model of this. Even it doesn't have to be one of these big, expensive, fancy dancy ones, but just get an idea where, I mean, to look at where are the residential ones, where are the ones that are never going to be developed, Where are the existing big buildings that'll be preserved? Where's a parking garage going to be and things like that?
Yeah, maybe that's something that should be added to the requirements for the plans that are submitted, that you need to have a three-dimensional view. Hmm?
Yes, I think it'd be very helpful.
That's something, maybe not.
A computer model or like hardscape?
I don't think we have to make the decision. I think just adding it right now, it doesn't belong in the first three slides, but later on, when you get into the sections that talk about what is submitted by the applicant, we don't want just 2D drawings. We want to see a 3D view, either a model or whatever, but make that decision later on. Anything else, Steve?
No, that's it. That's it.
Kevin, do you have any?
Yeah, so I agree what's been said so far, particularly on the scale. As you may remember, I asked about 3 Water Street, and that actually had not been part of our decision because it is a decision had already been rendered, I believe, by a building official. And scale, as we saw it and still see it, 3 Water has become very important, particularly in some of these special districts. So I'd love to see that. And the other thing I'd love to see is really what the proposed buffer is. And Jeff, you may have that later in some of these documents, et cetera, but that becomes, I think, very important. Other zoning areas of the town where an industrial commercial area may be next to residential. A comparison like that, I think, would be very important and a very important answer to the local residents. That's all, Jeff.
I only had one item under the purposes. I think the purpose C about buffers is really not a purpose. It belongs under the objectives.
Okay.
That it's A, B, and D are really what are the purposes. It's how you get there. Is item C is more how do you get there or what the controls are. I didn't have anything else in those early sections.
Mr. Chairman, I might have one more thing.
Yes.
Is that for, I was going to, not that it's a detail, but considering what I'm hearing now, the term of adequate roadway access. One thing that seems to be clear is that, or it seems to be happening, is that the roadway access that gets talked about in all of this is connecting up to Cow Hill. How well do you connect it? There's 2 traffic lights that connect there and you connect to that. Unfortunately, probably 80% of the traffic that comes out of this 1,000-person development is going to head down to the highway. And part of that is already kind of maxed out in terms of its current configuration. So I'm not sure how much we can put on the onus on the developer to help that, but we need something that counts for that instead of just dumping an extra 1,000 commuters onto the highway at that intersection that's already pretty bad off in the afternoons. It's not too bad in the mornings, but in the afternoons it's hellish.
Yeah. Under development objectives at item G, I sort of interpreted that as meaning including town roads that provide the access like you're talking about. But it certainly has to be accounted for somewhere.
Yep.
You have to do a traffic study to say, do the existing roads support this? And
Yep.
I would think they're a little questionable.
So
Hmm?
I agree with the traffic study so long as it doesn't come back saying, yes, it'll be fine, because it's not fine now.
No, I don't. Well, I don't think you can say that Cow Hill Road is sufficient to support this traffic of a big site like this without improvements.
Yeah, Jeff, just from past experience with some traffic studies we had, we almost never got what I would call a satisfactory response. it was like, okay, the service level went from C to D. And then everybody just kind of shrugged and said, okay, it's only one drop. There has to be a criteria set up front that says, if we have a certain level now, that it can't be, degraded more than 2 levels or something. But,
Mhm.
the problem is that there's never a pass-fail criteria.
I think you're right, Steve. It's just that it not necessarily need pass fail, as long as what's the understanding of what dropping down a level is. How they figure that out in the engineering study, they'll say, how long are you going to wait at a traffic light now before you can make it through? That's the reality of it.
Yeah.
And if you're going to add a traffic light, how far does that back traffic up? How many steps down? How long are the traffic lights? That's what kind of hits home. We're accustomed to 20-second waits being a long time for a traffic light, and there's none in downtown Mystic now at all. This is where they are in Mystic right now. So just adding a traffic light or saying that it will just be 20% heavier, I agree, it's not the answer. The roadway undoubtedly can handle another 1,000 cars just driving through. Unfortunately, they need to stop and turn and merge, and that's where we know it doesn't work.
Mhm. Okay.
So one thing I would ask, particularly with your experience, your recent experiences, if there are, yes, we've struggled coming up with a standard with staff that would help say, yes, this passes, no, it doesn't, or at least one of you made the point that maybe it's not a pass fail, but at least you have a better understanding of the actual impacts and the actual degradation of service. We will continue to work on that. And also, if there is any, I think Jeff related to or referred to this earlier, if there's anything that you see that's not on that list of application material requirements that you think it would make it easier for you to make a determination or a decision, that you're frustrated that people don't come to the table with those items, think about that. Let us know if there's anything that would make your life easier, would make it easier for you to make that decision, because then we can add that to the list of materials that will have to be provided, much like a 3D model. But yeah, any tools that we can provide you to make a better determination on that, we will continue looking into.
Isn't that really one of the main points of what we're trying to get to tonight is to write what we need to see?
Yep, exactly.
Rather than saying we're not approving this particular site plan. It's just the concerns or what do we have to review or
Exactly.
look.
So with this, yeah, we're not talking about the actual site plan tonight. We're talking about the zoning and the tools that you need to make a good decision about any proposal. Yes.
All right. So why don't we get back to the presentation then, Jeff?
Okay. So next is permitted uses. And this, I think, again, is going to be very, very similar to what you last saw in March. The biggest conversation back in March was around production uses. And so you'll see we have kept all the ones that were discussed: alcoholic beverage production, artisan and craft workshops, flex space, food and non-alcoholic beverage production, small scale. And there was a decision based on the conversation last time to allow light industrial, but no more than 5,000 square feet per building, not on the ground floors, sorry, not on the front side of the ground floors, and not in any building with residential use. So that, again, should be pretty similar to what you've already seen. So we did, one of our goals was to minimize, if not entirely eliminate, special permits. Wanted to be as explicit about what you want to see happen so that you can minimize that need for special permits. So staff and I went through use by use, all the things that are currently allowed with special permits in the RU80, and only found 2 that we thought, yeah, no matter what, these are still going to require a special use permit. And that would be filling and removing of earth products and telecommunications towers. Everything else would be allowed by right. So if something is marked as special, needing a special permit in the RU80 zone, it would simply be allowed by right. We also have said in this current draft that the use conditions for uses in the RU80 would not apply within the MEC zone. But this is one of those things that is definitely up for discussion tonight. And I wanted to give you just a couple examples to set the stage for this conversation. So basically, the use conditions in the RU80 fall into two categories. One are those conditions that really make commercial uses palatable in a residential zone. So you have a number of commercial uses that are allowed in the RU80 because you have larger lot sizes, because it's a more rural area and there's less of an impact on surrounding neighbors. So for an example, medical clinics, you have to have larger minimum lot area, smaller building footprint, greater setbacks, which really isn't relevant in the context of a master plan development, though those details are going to be taken care of at the master plan level. The second type are those conditions that really apply regardless of the zoning district in which the use is located. So for an example of that is a childcare center, where you have standards for outdoor play space, extra buffers, safe drop-off areas. And those conditions remain relevant no matter where the use is located. But some of them get a little wonky in the context of a master plan process. Staff and Horsley Witten Group thought it would make sense to deal with the issues that you've dealt with in use conditions in the MEC at the master plan level. And so our next question for you all this evening is, are you comfortable with that general approach? The other alternative, and we can absolutely do this, is to go through use condition by use condition and say, this would apply, this would not apply, this would apply, this would not apply. Yeah.
But with a master plan, that would include identifying the specific uses and their locations and size.
Yes.
It's
So the
not
master
like just
plan
zoning
criteria
regulations.
right now is very specific, and actually your town attorney, this was one of his major points, is that the master plan include specific buildings and uses within those buildings.
So it's really that we're allowing an appropriate size use in all these cases. It's not the builder just can't come in and by right have the ability to build a, say, a exhibit hall for 20,000 people.
Right. You still have to judge it in the context of the overall development.
The master plan would specify what the size is.
Yes.
Either in square footage or number of people or something like that. So it's really more restrictive than what a normal use listing is.
In that respect, yes, because you have more control over the ultimate content of the master plan. And the master plan, and I have slides about this later, really becomes the regulations for this land. So the zoning text in this case for the floating zone is sort of laying out the parameters that help you get to that point, the master plan. But yes, it's the master plan itself where all those decisions are made. And in that regard, yes, you have more control, and it is stricter than your general use table.
And a couple of key points that Jeff Davis just made there is this is one of the things the town attorney really stressed when we were going through this draft regulation, that the master plan itself takes on kind of a piece of the regulations, because you, the commission, once we get an application to land the zone, and as part of that, a master plan would be created. And by you approving that master plan, that's where size of the building, the footprint of the building, where things go, the density, all of that is getting set at the master plan. And if there's going to be changes to that, they have to come back and amend that through a public hearing and through a process that's very spelled out that we'll get into later in the regulations. So, one of the things that's tough with this is as we're going through these regulations, there is a little bit of a chicken and egg because we need to think about, all right, what's the context of the master plan? It's not just, oh, if we do this, it's a free for all. You, the commission, have the ultimate say on what is approved for that master plan.
Okay. Did you want feedback from the commission on the users table, Jeff?
Yes.
So we might as well go down the list again. With Hal, do you have any concerns with the table?
Oh, I guess not. I guess not.
Yeah.
I'm thinking with the master plan, I just was wondering if we work it out with the master plan. If I'm a developer, not this developer who's been part of this process, but if I'm some other developer and I come into that, is this going to be too hard to do? Or is the uses just spelled out for the master plan? Does it get us in the same place? I know it gives us this, but so much more power. I like that idea, and that keeps everything. Well, if you do this, then don't do that. And I don't like the way they go together. And I like the holistic approach.
Yes.
But is it if I'm on the other side of the table, does that work for me as well? Or now do I know what to do? If I come up with a master plan and just have us just shoot it down because we kind of don't like it?
Well, that's, I will say to your point, Helen, that's an excellent point. Why we've really stressed the pre-application meetings in this draft, because for that very reason, that we don't want anyone to submit an application before they have a really good sense of what the town wants and how the process works. So even though state law does not allow us to require a pre-application, it is strongly, strongly encouraged in this draft so that all that gets worked out prior to an application.
Okay.
Barbara, do you have anything to say? Sue? Any comments?
Keep forgetting I'm muting myself. Yes, a few things to say on this. I think one thing we went back to from time to time in zoning is we have these zoning regulations, and they were over time, they were put together, and they give people certain guards against things happen to neighborhoods they might have moved into, made one of the biggest financial investments of their life and all that sort of thing. And when you start off with a slide 9 permitted uses, and you're talking about conditions that make commercial uses palatable, and we're talking about a medical clinic. I mean, this particular project, which I think is a good project, but it's so far removed from what that zoning language was talking about, that to jump from that or a childcare center to these huge parking garages and other things is, I think it's too big of a leap, because it puts you in a position, I think, of really ignoring your zoning regulations and going right to something, a master plan, that you're starting with really no standards. And you go from that to maybe, and in some cases, not having the public involved like they should be, to a situation where I think you're bringing about things that are not what people would have expected, be it traffic, be it looking at the 120-foot building, I mean, whatever the thing is. So I think that's a basic problem with this structure. Okay, that's it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Steve, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I also have a little problem with the fact that we really, I think in the previous slide, there was only 2 things that were requiring a special permit. So this is almost like, we used to have regulations that were saying what is available, what is allowable. And now we're saying essentially what's not allowable. And I don't know, I can't conceive everything that could possibly go into this site, but something that Hal had said when we were talking about downtown, it was, well, how can we not permit this because it follows our regulations? And that's kind of the problem now, that if we're not restricting anything, essentially, what are our grounds to deny it?
Yeah.
And I mean, you are restricting things. You're restricting a lot of things. And remember, there is still the use table, and you're allowing things that are allowed currently in the RU 80. Really, the big difference is we're lifting a lot of the special permits, again, because a lot of that conversation is going to happen through the master plan. But I mean, actually, one of the things that your town attorney was encouraging us to do is like, why do you have this list of uses at all? We should open it up and just let this be pounded out at the master plan level.
Well, that's why he's a lawyer and we're the zoning.
Sure, exactly. And so what we kept going back to him and saying was, that we know from experience that the Planning and Zoning Commission is not comfortable with that kind of approach, that you want to have, you want to lay out more of your expectations up front and embed them into this so that any master plan has to respect those things. So I don't want you to think that this is wide open or that it could be just any use. I mean, there is still a use table that will have to be followed. For us, it was more the process. Again, trying to minimize the special permits. The plan being like once you've worked it through the master plan, you should be good, and like the range of what you can expect. And if that changes significantly, then you have to go back and go through that process again with a public hearing and so forth. So just so you know, we know your preferences as a body generally, and that has definitely informed the draft you see before you. Because we could easily just say we could make this a 7-page document instead of a 20-some page document, but we know that you prefer to have those controls built in. So we have tried to balance that.
Steve, if you look at the, excuse me, the memo that was sent out with the packet on page 4, those are the uses that would be allowed in this zone. So we did set that out.
And obviously, any of that is still up for discussion. Again, I think that you reviewed this back in March. It's been a long time ago. But if there's anything on that list, you're like, I don't think we should allow that. That's another reason we're here. And we don't have to necessarily go through use by use today. But if you have specific ideas that you want to email to staff and say, I don't think these uses are appropriate here, then that is all definitely still up for discussion.
And again, I think we can't stress enough the importance of the master plan and the power that master plan holds over this site in your approval or denial of things as they move forward. Because the master plan is going to say what the uses are, where they are, and the intensity that they are, as well as they relate to setbacks, through buffering the rest of the regulations. So it certainly wouldn't be a free-for-all. And then through that master plan process, once it's approved, again, Jeff had said this, but again, I really want to stress it. If someone wants to change that, they have to come back through a public hearing and change that.
Yeah, this list is not items by right. They're just possible things that could be allowed is what it is.
That's right. That's right.
What
And
the difference is. They're not by right.
right. And the commission can evaluate each one of them, where they're located, what the intensity is, and determine they're just not appropriate for the site.
Okay, but for example, in the light industrial, it says no more than 5,000 square feet. But when you get to a hotel, it just says hotel or nursing facility or something. And so all these things are so wide open, it's very hard to even think about what the plan is here.
No, the plan would have to state say the hotel, how big it would be, either physical size and how many rooms. Then when we went through the review for the seaport, they had their master plan. Wasn't that part of the discussions that we had when we looked at that?
Yeah, that's
Hmm?
right. But then you're out of the zoning regulation field. You're into the master plan.
Yes, you're out of the zoning regulation. This is a special, really
Right.
like an override. Is the
I
way
think
I-
with
That's
the seaport, actually weren't looking at what we think of as a master plan. Remember, it was just a site plan of the project that they were going to do.
Yeah, but it was their master.
It wasn't a real they said it was a master plan, but it had no future in it. It was just the project that they had in mind. That's all it was.
Well,
But in this case, to Sue's point, and to the point of the panelist, of the attendee who mentioned, when you see the word hotel motel in there, without any limitation, even though you do have a limitation on the light industrial. So if you're going to have a little limitation on light industrial, maybe just a little more thought on having hotel, I would say not motel, but just hotel, and some standard for it. And if you want to change that, you get to, but have a baseline standard for how much we expect it. We're not expecting a 120-foot tall hotel. That's not what we have in mind for that location there. And if we don't, let's not lead anybody to believe that. Let's not have a developer see that thing and say, hey, I can do a hotel with some houses around it. It's not what we have in mind for the site.
Thanks, Hal. I think that's a good comment.
Yeah, but we probably need some extra words added as how you apply this table. I think there's confusion with that from listening to the discussion.
Well, I'm still confused
It's
because these
no, it's
are
it's
permitted
not-
by right.
no, they're not by right. They're possibly. You don't need a zoning regulation change, but the master plan can limit them or say we don't want to have that in this particular site.
Yeah, so I may have said by right earlier, and so I misspoke. It's not so much, Jeff has described it perfectly. It is not by right. These are uses that are possible under the master plan. And you can certainly add additional restrictions if you say, I know under no circumstances will we ever want a hotel that has more than 100 guest rooms or that is taller than whatever. You can say that up front, or you can give a development team the chance to say, I think we should do it this way, here's why. And then you still have the authority under the master plan process to say, no, that's out of scale. We want this to be primarily residential. I mean, you could say that you don't want more than 25% of the gross floor area of the entire project to be non-residential. You could do any number of those things. It's really just a matter of how specific you want to get.
But
One of the
Jeff-
items that we were trying to think about as we were putting this together in the last conversation we had with the commission, again, stressing that master plan, the master plan and the conversation that is had through that between the commission and the developer is going to set the intensity and these uses if they're acceptable. So for example, in their master plan, I know that Restler is looking to do a smaller boutique hotel. The theater or cinema is actually thinking more about a possible use that would be in the Pratt building. So again, it's not that if there's going to be a, or conference or exhibit hall, I think somebody said with a seating of 20,000 people, you have the ability to set that at the master plan at the right intensity. And we as staff, I think we're hesitant to put very specific criteria or minimums or maximums on things, because then we're starting to box things in where the developer might make a case for something. Oh, okay, yeah, that we like that, or no, we don't like that. And so you, the commission, have the ultimate say. And it isn't like our typical zoning regulation where if it states it's allowed, you have to approve it. These are possible uses that if they're approved in the master plan, which you can deny or say, no, we won't approve it if it has that or at that level of intensity, you have to change it. That gives you the ultimate ability.
So, yeah, those thoughts I think have to be added in here somewhere because it seems like it's very confused a lot of people.
Well, I think also we actually do have a plan, which I presume the developer of Mystic River Bluffs came up with this. And so even just looking at this aerial view, as it were, of the plan, I don't even know what this means. I don't know any stories. I don't know. Really, I don't have a good feel for how close this is to residential neighborhoods and other things. So already we do have some very specific assumptions. And yet then we're supposed to come up with another list of assumptions where the developers already has a very good idea of what they want to do. I think it's a little bit dysfunctional myself.
But he may not be the developer.
Well, chances are until we have another horse come in the race.
It should be more general. The intent is to make it more general. So if this development falls through, which a lot of times they do, that somebody else can come in.
Well, I don't have anything against that. What does this mean? What does this development mean? This plan we have here?
You mean?
I don't know. I have no idea.
Well, you either have to completely change the zoning regulations, which I don't think we want to do. We want more control over that. Well, why don't we keep going? Kevin, do you have anything to add here?
Oh, so I'll just answer the question after listening to some good debate here. Are you comfortable with such things being worked out in the master plan? My answer is yes, because it's all possible uses. And therefore, by taking out too much early on, we do box in potential on what the developer wants to do. If that developer, if it doesn't work out for that developer, or if that developer sells it, to the next developer, that the plan has been done that is too restrictive today. So why don't we work it out in a master plan? This is just for the MEC. So the answer is yes, I'm very comfortable working it out in a master plan.
Okay.
What becomes our grounds for not approving a master plan? How does somebody present a master plan and we say we don't like it?
Yep, so there are
Good question.
criteria for approving the master plan. Looking through here, hold on.
And if I could just add one other thing to what Hal said, this is Kevin. I think this slide should be a little bit further in the presentation. We should have more of what the scope is and then ask that question. So it just looks a little early in the process here. So
You got to look at what the agenda has
I know.
for all the texts. I think maybe it helps to look at that.
Yeah.
And it's not just the PowerPoint, it's
Yep, it's a text.
the text.
Yeah, absolutely. We couldn't put everything in the PowerPoint or we'd be here all night.
And tomorrow.
Right.
I agree with that. Just the timing of it. That's my only point.
Right. Okay. On the use table, I just had one item on the use table on the light industrial work. It says you can't have the item located on the ground floor of any building or in any building that also includes residential use. Well, you see some commercial places where they sell a product and they may have a little window that you can see people working on something or doing something with it. And I don't know that that's objectionable. If it's only just purely manufacturing with no sales, it's a little different. So you might want to take a look at that and make it a little more flexible.
So just to clarify, it was nothing on the ground floor at the front of the building. So you could have something like if you walked in and then, like you say, there's
but-
something on the ground floor in the back of the building and you can look through a window and you can,
Yeah, but sometimes you might have it in the front, as an attraction.
no, that's up to you guys. If you want production on the ground floor, that is totally fine. There's just
Only
something
in
we
those
discussed last
cases
time we were
where-
together.
Maybe only in those cases where it's associated with retail.
Yeah, I think it was in response to a comment about making sure that the street is lively and there's activity and that it's not just a manufacturing
That's what it's
assembly in the front,
trying to
right?
prohibit. Hmm?
Yep.
But it was in a comment that was made in the spring, I think, that was based on it. I just wonder whether it should be a little looser. Yeah, you don't want it just purely manufacturing. But if it was just a small section that was devoted to it.
I might be getting into the details about
Well,
if it's manufacturing, then we want to see it because it's an attraction. We want to see the guy making chocolate or donuts or whatever it is.
yes. Hmm? Sometimes you'll see that.
Right.
It's really in addition to a retail. It's not the primary.
Right. It's a storefront activity, not
Yeah.
behind the wall.
Right. Well, Jeff, you want to continue on?
Certainly. All right. So we've already gone over this a little bit, but in terms of the process overview, again, very similar to what you saw in March. We have not changed this much. That again, I think one thing we have changed is we've really beefed up the pre-application review text and made sure that that starts with staff and then continues on to the commission. We also specifically add the Inland Wetlands Agency to that process as well, so that they're informed early. I mean, again, not that anyone is officially approving anything at this point, but we want to make sure that all of the approving bodies are aware as early as possible and identifying potential issues as early as possible. And as we've already discussed, town staff did spend a lot of time looking at all the materials that are required for all of these levels of application. And from their perspective, these are the things that you would need to make a good decision. But again, not that we have to go through line by line tonight, but be looking at that and thinking, are there other things like 3D models that would really help you make this decision, or things that you wish were required now that would make your decision making easier.
Mhm.
Again, these are things we've already gone over. This is what John mentioned about the authority of the master plan. I won't reiterate that now, but we'll bring up minor modifications. So this is one thing that we went back and forth on, whether there should be criteria for what counts as a minor modification of the master plan so that you wouldn't have to go back to public hearing. And your town attorney really felt that that was legally questionable and advised that the master plan process is already flexible enough to accommodate minor modifications. And so you really don't want to mess with that. If there's going to be a significant change, as John has mentioned several times, it will have to go back to public hearing and go back to that process again.
This statement to me, doesn't make any sense. What happens with a minor modification? Is there such a thing as a minor modification?
So your town attorney has said, no, there shouldn't be, that a minor modification is
Treated
not
just
legal.
like any modification.
Right.
All modifications require going back through, it's like a zoning change.
Right.
That's-
Now the difference is, and I will ask for help from John and Deb in describing this. I was hoping your town attorney would be here this evening because we are now wading into legal territory that I'm not super expert on. But your town attorney feels that the master plan can set up a range. So where, if the road is proposed here, but it ends up having to shift 5 inches this way, that's not going to trigger that having to go back to public hearing. Like there's a range in which these things can happen within the master plan and still be consistent. But then once you get to the site plan level, that second level, that's where you take it down to the specifics, and you have to make sure that the site plan is within that range that was approved of in the master plan. John or Deb, did I state that well enough?
Yes, and Deb, jump in if I need a little help on this, but what the town attorney had said is really within not only the master plan document itself, but also the narrative that accompanies the master plan or notes that would be on the plan. It could speak to, for example, the road could shift over by 5 feet depending on grading and engineering, or, even the residential density could be, the range could be between here and there. And again, all of this can be set and negotiated by you, the commission, with the applicant. So it's what you feel is reasonable as we're going through that and as it's identified through the master plan and the narrative for that of what we ultimately approve.
So you're basically, the master plan would contain what I'd call tolerances for adjustment.
Yes.
That's a good way to
outside of
put it.
those specified tolerance changes, that is a change. But it's basically doing that, where you say something's 5 feet plus or minus 3 inches. If you exceed that tolerance, then you have to have a master plan change. That's what you're talking about here?
That's my understanding.
Okay.
Yes.
And so yes, that's actually a really good way of putting it, that the master plan, you get to set your tolerance level. It's like, we are comfortable with anything in this range. And, as long as you stay within this range, we're cool. If you leave that, then we have to go back to drawing board.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. All right.
So continuing on, again, very similar to what you saw before, the inland wetlands application and permit approval have to come first, and then special permit, if applicable, again, probably not as written, CAM if applicable, but mostly we're moving on to the site plan application, which is where things are going to get more specific. Wanted to point out that there are specific requirements for site plan in the MEC zoning they're different from what you have in your zoning overall in section 9.53. Now there are a lot of similarities, and we did initially attempt to see if we could cross-reference, but by and large there were enough differences that it made sense to us to just list everything here fresh, rather than having the applicant go back and forth to section 9.5 and back to the MEC. The intention of how all the materials have been structured, again, I really encourage you to take a look and see if this all makes sense to you. But so our intention was anything that we were asking for at the master plan level, we're rolling over to the site plan application and asking people to not recreate the wheel, but bring that all forward for the site plan approval, but with additional information and more specificity, so that you're not asking someone to duplicate work, that you're really building on what has come before. And for us to accomplish that, it was a little difficult to cross-reference back to the existing site plan requirements in 9.53. So with that, I will take another pause. Anything else, any other concerns about process?
Does anyone have any concerns with the process?
Jeff, can you just go back one slide? I just wanted to see where, so if it's not a special permit, the only place the public would weigh in is at the site plan?
And master plan. So the zoning map amendment and the master plan application both require public hearing. site plan application may require public hearing.
Well,
Special permit would, but it's unlikely.
And the adoption of these regulations will require a public hearing.
Yes, of course.
So there are a number of points. Adopting these regulations, the map amendment and the master plan require a public hearing. And then, the intensity and the general layout will be kind of set. And then there's inland wetlands if applicable, and then the other processes.
but why is the site plan just a may require?
Probably a question for Deb.
So site plans do not require public hearings by state statute. As you guys know, special permits do, zoning text amendments do, the master plan will. You may hold a public hearing, but there are no requirements for it in the statutes.
Okay, because I just, in my opinion, given the COVID thing and the Zooms and all this stuff, it's been extremely difficult for the public to weigh in as they used to. I will say the numbers have certainly fallen off the cliff since that happened. And how do you notice people, for example, say we're going to have a public hearing on this project, who all would be notified and how that there is going to be a public hearing?
So again, this would be a commission generated text amendment, the one we're discussing tonight. Again, there's no requirement for notification if it's a commission generated amendment. However, in the past, you have asked us to notify abutters and folks within 150, 200 feet or neighborhoods, and we've done that. Certainly could happen again this time. Not required by statute, but just in the interest of making sure everyone is aware that this is going forward. We're happy to do that.
Yeah, I think that'd be good. Even tonight's meeting, I'm not sure how people knew about it, that would have been abutters or whatever.
Right. It was sent to all the town council members and all the RTM members. There's a number of RTM members in this district who are in close contact with the neighbors. And I think that's probably how a number of them became aware of it.
Right, but it'd be good to have a more, make sure it's an equitable process so that everyone who should be notified is notified, I think. And I think given the fact that there haven't been public hearings for a lot of things, that it would be good to err on the side of disclosure and letting people have their say on something as big and intense as this. So.
Yep. I also want to note that there is a way to sign up for notifications for town or commission generated zoning amendments. You can just contact our department, anyone who's interested, and you will be put on the notification list. But we'll develop a program to make sure that people are aware of it.
Right. Because the list may not be too long or have too many addresses from here. I don't know.
No, it's true. There's a few people who are aware of it who have signed up. But yep, we'll do a notification process.
Great, thank you.
Well, should that be added to this proposed change to the zoning regulation?
So the first application that will come forward with this process is this zoning text amendment. So there's not a way to incorporate the notification into the regs without that public hearing.
No, but as part of this change.
Sure, yeah.
That's what I meant by that. I didn't mean to.
I think you're right, Jeff. I think you're right. We should have a notification requirement for the master plan and the text amendment, and maybe set typically it's 150 feet, but maybe you want to do something larger than that.
Yeah, just something.
Yep.
Yeah, as opposed to, I didn't need to do it in advance. But it's part of the change.
I guess one other thing that struck me, and might sound like a little far out idea, but given that there is so much various kinds of open space, town, DP, other things around here, I was wondering if it wouldn't be a good idea to at least get a response from the Conservation Commission. Not talking about anything as formal as public hearings and things, but maybe a letter of, comments on this proposal, and perhaps get them involved early on too, to at least some extent, being aware of things and all, and having an opportunity for feedback.
Got to reinstate the meetings of the committee of chairpersons.
Yes.
Hmm?
So it'd be a good case for it, right?
It's a good, no, seriously, huh?
It would, no, you're right. Yeah, only not quarterly, maybe.
More frequently.
Hmm.
Hmm?
Yep.
Nobody was interested in that after a while.
Mhm.
Hmm?
No, but this is an interesting one we have here.
It is. Is there some way we can take out all these details and how you produce drawings for the submittal and put them into an appendix or something that really doesn't affect our approval? They're really just the town requirements.
That's up to the staff. If you like, certain of those things can just be pulled out into a checklist rather than being part of the.
Well, maybe they need to be in a formal document because you'd refer it to it saying that all submittals have to be submitted in this format. Because it's a lot of pages in here that describe that.
Yep, for sure.
But they should be similar to regular site plan requirements. There are a few extra add-ons, but I just wonder if it would make it even easier for an applicant to look at it like that when he gets, does his descriptions. And
Yeah, I'm happy to defer to you all and the staff on that, whatever format you think is best.
because you need the information, it's just whether it's part of this new proposed section 655.
Jeff, we'll take a look at that and see if there's another way of doing it, or if this is the best way. We kind of had gone around a few times figuring out how to minimize the length of the reg, but also making sure everything was in the right place too. So maybe Deb, Jeff Davis, and myself can kind of kick around some ideas.
Well, it could be in an appendix to the zoning regulation, but it would be a permanent thing because, it doesn't affect our approval at all, how many copies you have or what size the drawings are on, but they're necessary for the developer or applicant to prepare the documents in this way. It's a definite requirement, but it's not unique to a specific application. Jeff, do you have anything else to go over tonight?
Moving on.
Go ahead.
All right, so this was one of the things that was brought up again by the public tonight, and I just wanted to explain to you our thought process through the building height piece. So the first regard was for existing residential structures, and that we would base the allowed building height on a sliding scale based on the distance to those existing residential structures. So that if you're between 60 feet to, I should say, there's a required 60-foot buffer around the entire perimeter. And between 60 and 100 feet, you can go up to 60 feet. Between 100 feet and 300 feet, you can go up to 70 feet. And at 300 feet or greater, again, from the nearest existing residential structure, you could go up to 80 feet. Now, the caveat that everyone has certainly noticed, and we knew this would be a point of discussion for sure, is the allowance that a building could go up to 120 feet if there were 4 full levels of structured parking within the building. And our thought process behind this was, we wanted to, again, protect the existing residential structures from taller buildings. B, we wanted to encourage the development of structured parking so that we could minimize the amount of surface parking and therefore try to boost the amount of open space or landscape space on the site. We also wanted to push that height and that parking, again, as far away from existing residential as possible. And that was the intention here. Of course, this is very much up for debate. One of the things that we have asked Respler to provide, because I think this would be one of those things that would just be very helpful in helping everyone to visualize this, is if you took these regulations and the existing proposal, what would that look like? Where would these heights be allowed? Which also gives you an opportunity, I know when you do a site visit, to say, all right, what's the topography of where these heights are allowed, and does that help to mitigate some of the perceived massing of structures in those areas? And I understand it's a really difficult thing to evaluate without a specific example, without the modeling that you've been mentioning, without really seeing what it looks like on the ground. So I know that staff has been working with Respler to try to get those things for you so that you can see what the actual impact is. And I fully expect that once you've had a chance to look at that, you might say, nope, not acceptable. We need to go back to the drawing board on this one. Or you might say, oh, actually, with the topography, this works out okay. But I do recognize that that's a little difficult to discuss now. Actually, those were all my talking points that I just went through. So any thoughts on this building height issue?
Why don't we go around and ask everybody? Hal, do you have any concerns?
Yeah, I understand the idea of encouragement to get more structured parking, but offhand, I think that's probably too much encouragement for that location. One thing is that, 120 feet, I believe the Mohican in New London is around 120 feet. I just took a look at the picture and sized it up, and it's pretty close to that. And so when you drive to New London, what you see is the Mohican. You think it's a really fantastic thing, and I'm sure it once was. That would be the same thing here if it's down the hill from the residential side. You're right, it might seem lower because if it's on the side of a hill, it's really not sticking up that far. But you have the same thing happen as you approach from the Stonington side. On the highway, it will be there in all its glory. All 120 feet will be visible. And I think that's not necessarily a terrible thing, but if we don't have any architectural controls over it, then it would be terrible. I can see where that height could be broken up, and it could be a stepped structure or something like that. So the total height might be up that far and you wouldn't really feel it. But if we're telling someone you can go up 120 feet for apartments or whatnot, it's going to go straight up right now. So that in itself, just put out there as 120 feet without some other right up front caveats, I have a real problem with that.
Barbara?
I agree with Hal. I'm still in shock over 3 Water Street. So anything higher than that would make me cringe. I firmly believe in structured parking. I think we should have more of it. But having, I don't know, 5-6 story building on top of the parking structure, that's too much. It's going to be too big.
Stu?
Yeah, I think here again, when you look at the numbers and everything, you say, gee, you could have a building 120 feet that's 300 feet away from a house. You know, that sounds horrible. But again, talking about scale model, the topography there is fairly dramatic. It kind of depends where a lot of these things are, if they're even going to be seen as much or how high they're going to look. So I just don't have a good sense for that, how it's going to really fit. And that's why going back to the first thing I was talking about, some scale model with the topography taken into account, I think would actually probably further the case for some of these more unusually high buildings.
Mhm. Steve?
I think it's already been said.
Kevin?
Same. It's already been said, Jeff. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, I sort of agree that this would be like a 10-story building. It's a little, if our objective is to save some so-called historic structures, I don't think you want something that's going to be higher than they are, or they'll lose their significance and they're meaningless then. So it shouldn't anywhere get much higher in sight, at least at their level, than what the existing buildings are. And certainly for the neighbors, it could be shocking to see a building that high. But perhaps the 3D model would solve some of the issues.
You might want to have some more definition into what 120 feet means, because on that site especially, you have the opportunity to have a building crawl up the hill so that the ground floor would be down the hill farther, and it would step back and go up and step back and go up. So you'd actually never be more than 40 or 50 feet high off the grade, but you'd have a 120-foot building because it would go down the hill 70 feet.
Yeah.
So there's that kind of opportunity to step something like that up the hill. That wouldn't be a problem. So maybe it just takes a little more definition of how far above natural grade it needs to be, and not just the total height. Because the total height straight up, not so good. The total height stretched out, maybe it's not so bad.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've had this conversation about your existing definition for height and how height is measured. And we repeatedly asked the development team, go back and look at your plan and measure the buildings according to how we measure our height today. And this may become a moot point. So we do need to see that before any of us can make really an educated decision about this. That's an excellent point, Hal.
Yeah, well, it's like looking at the tech center at EB from the street. It doesn't look as tall as it does from a waterfront because they actually purposely built it that way to meet a city regulation at one time.
Yeah. Do you remember that had basement 1, basement 2, basement 3, and basement 4?
The city said you could only have 5 stories or something.
Yeah.
Or some limit on that, so they cheated and minus stories in a building. That's how they got it through.
For this site, it would work to just say how many, a much lesser number, 50 feet, some much lesser number above natural grade. It would still allow a 120-foot building. It just could never be more than 120 feet above natural grade.
You'd have a walkout basement of 3 levels.
Well, if it was straight down, but I'm saying it could step.
It could step too, yeah.
That's right.
But
No,
if you
that
had
could work.
a parking garage out at 3 levels beneath grade, that's fine too.
Sure, absolutely.
But it requires some look anyway. As it's written, I don't think it's acceptable.
Right. Yeah, we knew this one was not going to be acceptable for you all. This is
Not the way
a starting point.
Not the way it's written, but.
All right. Shall we continue?
Yes, go on.
All right. So very quickly, as I already mentioned, we're proposing a 60-foot setback around the entire perimeter of the MEC. Just as an example, the greatest setback required in the RU 80 today is 50 feet for front yards. Side and rear yards are about half that. So we wanted something that was greater than what was required already. We also do say that if you have a building that meets the height requirements for the RU 80, and so that's 30 feet, then you can follow the setbacks for the RU 80. You don't have to follow these larger setbacks if you're building something that would have been okay within the RU 80 anyway. And then we also mentioned that lot and yard and coverage requirements internal, so not bordering an adjacent parcel, will simply be defined in the master plan level rather than trying to squeeze that out. I expect this will be a bit of a conversation too, so I want to talk about the residential density piece before we pause again. So we had talked about this a great deal back in March about setting a baseline residential density and allowing that density to increase depending on public amenities that were provided. And so where we are now, and this again is still up for debate, is a base density of 1 dwelling unit per 5,000 square feet. And your bonus density, you can get as high as 2,000 square feet per dwelling unit. Again, so long as you meet or provide certain amenities back to the public. Again, when we calculate this, this all depends on the ultimate land area of the zone. So if you're just looking at the Municipal Education Center property itself minus the conservation lands, you may be able to get approximately 800 units on that. If you go up and get more and more of the adjacent parcels, as has been discussed, you might be able to hit 1,200, 1,300 units just based on these calculations. And again, Respler can calculate that and share with you what those numbers are based on their most current proposal. In terms of the incentive options, again, I think you're going to find them pretty similar to what we had before. We did eliminate some of them because we opted to make them just requirements. We also really tried to smooth them out so that they're all roughly comparable and developers wouldn't simply gravitate towards the quote unquote easy ones. Pardon me. So we have mixed use, at least 5% of the property would be non-residential. Affordable housing for 10% of dwellings. Universal design for at least 10% of the dwellings. Outdoor public recreational amenities on or off site. So this could include improvements to access to the river or the conservation lands next door with trails. Multi-story parking structures. And we have a little work to do on this one. Right now we have both at least 100 spaces and or 20% of required parking. We're still working out a reasonable criteria for that. And also must meet LEED Gold certification criteria, not be LEED Gold certified because that has certain costs associated with it, but you have to demonstrate that you have hit all the criteria for LEED Gold status. Provide at least 20% of your energy use on site with renewable energy. Provide indoor recreation and community amenities open to the public. Mass transit provisions. And we're pretty specific about this now, that it has to be at least 2 different types, whether that be bus or water taxi or car share service, for example. Energy Star for new construction requirements are met. Heat island reduction, so making sure that at least 30% of hardscapes on site are shaded or are using solar reflecting materials. Preservation, so this would go above and beyond our preservation requirements and ask that 50% of usable gross square feet of all remaining buildings are preserved. And then this one I was talking with staff about earlier, provision of dedicated bicycle facilities. That's already required. And so we would have to, if we wanted to keep this one, it would have to be, we'd have to determine what above and beyond you already require for bicycle facilities. So that's probably good for a quick pause. How are people feeling about this list and this range of density?
Well, might as well go around again. Hal, do you have any input?
Yeah, one thing just caught my eye. I like most of them. Not quite sure how. I like the idea of them being kind of equal, so people don't just go for the low-hanging fruit. Though my experience is that they'll take the low-hanging fruit and then take the next hardest thing, then take the next hardest thing. So I don't know if it's a problem to have some things that are too easy, pretty easy. One of the things is I'm all in favor of the way you phrase the lead certification criteria and not the lead certification. You might actually have to throw an extra word in there just to make sure that one of the things for lead certification criteria is to get it certified. So you might need to twist that a bit to make sure that's not what you're looking for. But you also have some. I just brought up the lead checklist, which is just a one-page line item titles, and there's a bunch of overlap in the things you've got on here, such as heat island reduction and renewable energy. So those things are already in lead, and frankly, lead gold that we said is an enormous step compared to some of these things. So maybe the trick is to break these down a little bit more. Now, just to the level of parking, say you provide this much parking or this much energy reuse, you get this much, you get twice that much, you get another step up, 3 times as much, another step up, 20% of energy, renewable energy. That's not really very much at all right now. Residential, it's pretty easy to get to 80% or look at net zero, which I think you're going to get pretty close to net zero to get in the realm of a LEED gold certification. So there's a big overlap in that. I understand. I think they need to be jived a little bit more and more stepped. So you have, I'm okay with the subject lines, but exactly how it's solved. LEED is just too big a step to just throw in there. And maybe just pull things off the LEED thing or have enough pieces off of the LEED list and then say other LEED things, and that'll give you another step up because you'll have already covered so many of them.
That's a fair assessment. Thank you.
Barbara, do you have any comments?
Yes, could you tell me what does preservation of 50% of usable gross square feet of all remaining buildings mean?
Trying to think of a different way to say it. You've got okay, well, I'll put it in this context. So right now, the requirement.
What defines all remaining buildings?
All remaining buildings that are on site as of today. As of the time of the adoption of this zoning.
All buildings?
All buildings. So basically, so many buildings were torn down. Those that are left are all fairly historically relevant, or provide context for the site. And so I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but it's probably good to have this conversation concurrently. When we talked about historic preservation on the site back in March, most people felt it was the facades that were most important. So the requirement is to maintain the facades, and we'll get to that in a minute. So this bonus is if you're preserving more than just the facades, but the actual building itself. Yeah, so right now, this would apply to any remaining building on the site at the time of whenever the zoning were to pass.
But the 50% pertains to the inside of the buildings, not the facade. right?
Yes. So the facade is required to be preserved, a certain percentage of it. So that was the requirement. So we figured for the bonus, it would be to keep the interior of the building as well. Or at least that's the intention. And again, definitely up for debate, but that's how this is written now.
Anything else, Barbara?
No, I'm still not sure I understand what that means.
Do we really care about the insides of the buildings?
I want to know what the preservation of 50% means.
Well, it could literally mean that 50% of the buildings and all their floors are kept and preserved. So you could say the entire central administration building and some of the areas around it. On top of that, we have a requirement. So this is, of course, a bonus. We have a requirement that the front facade of the central administration building be preserved, and that at least half of the facades of the other buildings are kept and adaptively reused. You could build something new behind them. What would you, well, let me throw the question back at you. What would be your preference for historic preservation on the site?
Well, where did you get this 50% number from, I guess? Where is that a standard somewhere?
That is not a standard. That is just one of those things that we're trying our best to do something that met the conversation that we last had with you, which, again, our last conversation, it seemed you were primarily concerned about facades, but didn't want to handcuff new development that wanted to, adaptively reuse or build onto the existing buildings. So you wanted to have some of the preservation, but preservation wasn't a really high priority. So we thought, all right, we're requiring preservation of the facade. If we can say, okay, you get a little bonus if you can preserve more of the building, the actual interior of the building as well, then that would be a bonus. If you don't care about that, then this is not a good option, and we can get rid of it.
Yeah, from the conversation we had back in March, a few commission members had brought up, what are the significant facades on the, really the Mystic Education Center building that is still there? What is it we're trying to preserve? So we were trying to come up with a general standard, so at least we preserve a portion of the significant structures, and that there would be a bonus associated with that. Right now, the intent on the current draft of the master plan is to preserve both the Pratt building and the Mystic Education Center building itself. There might be some sections of that. I know that there's been some problems on the site, some break-ins, some water damage. There might be some pieces that are functionally obsolete, but I think that's something that the developers still want to, preserve the majority of those buildings.
Is there anything inside the buildings that's architecturally significant? Now, I don't think any of us has been in there, but is there any, I mean, if we didn't care about the outside, was there anything on the inside that is really worth giving the developer a plus up for keeping? Or is it just an old building on the inside?
I think a lot of it's an old building on the inside, but I think here when we're looking at 50% of the usable gross square feet, so it's not knocking down, I think the insides of the buildings are going to get changed a bit. I know that the state did a significant amount of, for lack of a better term, work on the inside of those buildings, pulling up asbestos tiling and things around pipes and trying to get it ready for demolition. But they didn't end up doing that. It almost would have been better if they had left some of that. So it's really the exterior of the building, but also the mass of the building that I think we're trying to preserve with this.
John, are these environmentally questionable? with regard to asbestos and lead and?
Yes, I mean, it's one of the, there is a significant cost, and this is something that I think once we invite the developer to the table to talk a little bit about that master plan, I think that'll help shed some light on maybe why some of the things are being proposed at the densities that they are, because in order to make this work, there's a lot that needs to be cleaned up on the site, and it costs a lot of money.
When we're using this usable gross square feet, we're not talking about maintaining the interior. It's just the outside volume of the building is what this means. Is that what it is?
I think that was the intent. I don't think we're really talking about making sure the plaster on the wall stayed, but
No, the interior woodwork, no, it really is. So that it's more than facadism, so that you're keeping the structure and not just the facade.
It's the volume of the building,
That's the intention.
not the square footage. It's the volume.
Fair.
so maybe we can do a little reworking of that to make it a
That'd be
little
great.
clearer.
That makes sense.
That'd
yeah.
be terrific.
I mean, if you value that, if you don't value that, then we certainly don't have to offer it up as.
No, we don't care about partitions inside the rooms and stuff. That's not what we're talking about here.
But you alluded to that there was some agreement to remediation of all the asbestos and lead and anything else that's harmful. I mean,
Oh,
is that written into the plan?
I know that the developers are looking to clean up the site. If there's asbestos and lead, and I mean, they have to bring it up to current standards, and that's all part of, their proposal to get these buildings a healthy, livable, workable state.
Okay, I just hope that we're not, tying our hands by saying preservation. Oh, you told us not to touch it,
We just need to change that statement.
Yeah. I think somehow we can, and I'm all for a class trip there. So if we can get inside the buildings, get a feel for what they look like on the inside, I'd like that. And then we can, make better decisions on words.
Or what they mean. Okay.
All right, well, shall we continue?
Let's continue.
Right.
Sue, did you have anything to add?
No, I agree with what Hal was saying about lead and everything. And 20% is, in this day and age for renewable energy, is such a low number. It was shocking, actually. I'm sure more could be attained. So it'd be good to hear maybe a little a different approach there.
Yeah, probably charging stations too, I don't know.
That's right. A couple of years.
Right. Steve, did you have anything to add?
Like I was just saying, maybe, can you go back one slide, Jeff? So when you talk about outdoor recreation on or off site, I mean, is that something we want to do?
So, for example, off-site outdoor recreation could be improvements to the boat ramp on River Road that is still, it's adjacent to this property. It's not far away. It could be, there's a town piece of open space adjacent to this property. They're going to build that right now doesn't have any trails on it. They're going to make improvements to that as part of it. Those are some of the things we're thinking about.
Oh, I gotcha. All right, and I would just probably throw in, in terms of to allow everybody to plug in their Prius or Teslas, charging stations, a certain amount of charging stations, which seems to be the coming thing.
Anything else, Steve?
Nope.
Kevin?
Nope, I'm fine. I put my 2 cents in there, Jeff.
Yeah, and I have no other items that haven't been already addressed. So back to you, Jeff.
All right. Well, we just covered contributing structures. So with your permission, we'll move on from that. So last major thing is design standards. Major things I wanted to go over were just a lot of the design standards are going to be very familiar. They were based on the design standards for the mixed-use town center zoning district. But again, there are enough differences that cross-referencing became cumbersome. So that while you should find them very similar to the MTC design standards, they are not the same. And it seemed easiest, again, for the applicant to just make sure everything was in one place. The major difference between these standards for the MEC and the MTC is that the MEC design standards are, again, meant to be for a self-contained master plan development, where a lot of the MTC design standards are meant to ensure that development on a lot of different parcels are working together and blending well with each other over time. So you'll see a lot of it's just a nuance, but that's one of the major differences between the two sets. However, as with the MTC design standards, we do have several cross-references remaining to other parts of the zoning regulations, such as lighting and landscaping, and those things that really do remain consistent wherever you are in town. So in terms of the categories of the design standards, you see we have basically the same list as before. We have integrated some of the other things that you have asked for, and I think in particular transit and the recreation and community space. But the basic categories are very similar to what you had seen. We had an extensive conversation in March about design of new buildings as they relate to the contributing structures or the remaining buildings on site. And again, it seemed like you didn't really want to tie people's hands to make things too matchy-matchy. So the goal was this is a direct quote from the draft: new construction shall be designed to acknowledge the character of contributing structures while encouraging differentiation. So the goal is that we're not replicating or matching the contributing structures, but still sustaining a sense of continuity in the architectural language. And we hope that this is consistent with your goals, but we definitely want to talk about that. And then finally, the last thing to discuss for this evening, we know that recreation and community space, private outdoor space, storage and laundry are all things that certainly you want to have an adequate measure of in this site, and they're all very important. These are things that you ask for in multifamily development elsewhere in the city or the town, pardon me. But in this context, it really is difficult to establish hard and fast regulations for them outside the context of seeing an actual master plan proposal. And staff and I have been going around in circles on this for a long time, and we really didn't get anywhere. So we just wanted to come to you and see, is this the type of thing that you would be comfortable having handled at the master plan approval stage, or would you like specific benchmark standards for recreation and community space, private outdoor space, and storage and laundry facilities on the site?
And one of the major factors in this conversation is the Pratt building, because the developer is proposing to completely renovate that and make it available to the residents. That's going to be something of the scale that we haven't seen with other development projects. So we're having a tough time utilizing our normal, 25 square feet per type of standard for a lot of these items.
And also with the massive amount of open space right next door, did it make sense to have to require private outdoor space? storage and laundry, we can always go back to our standards that you use currently for multifamily development. Or we just let them work it out in the master plan stage and say, leave it up to you guys to determine its adequacy then.
But that would be a requirement on their submittal to identify how these are going to be met.
Yes. So we would say, we expect you to address these things in the master plan to our satisfaction.
Mm-hmm. Right. You have anything else to add, Jeff?
No, that is the end of my presentation.
Just out of curiosity, if this proposal were implemented, what would be the increase in population in this area as a percentage, the existing population? We're increasing the size of Mystic by 20% or 50%?
I don't have an answer for that. I think it's something we can calculate in terms of units, how many units are being increased. It's hard to say exactly how many people will live in each unit. But I'm sure.
Just guess that it would probably a couple of thousand people by looking at the number of units and number of bedrooms that they have identified.
Yeah, I think we could be looking at, and I really want to get a better answer from the developer, but it could be 1,500 people to 2,000, somewhere in that realm at the current proposed density, because a lot of these units that they're proposing are smaller units.
Right. No, but there's a count in the table that was
Yeah.
provided by how many bedrooms and how many units. And that's what I figured it was 1,500, 2,000. Could be about it, but that's a pretty high percentage for
4,200 people in Mystic now.
So it would be it'd be about 40% then. 40% increase in the population of the area is what we're looking at.
Huge.
They'd have to build a new post office. But that's on Stonington's side. Or they'd expand the West Mystic one.
Or this project could include one.
Or they have to put one out here, right?
Light up with another zip code.
Yeah.
They almost need their own zip code.
They
Not
would.
2,000 people.
So a couple of the logistical items that Deb and I wanted to put out there is that, one, I will check with, I've already sent an email to the town clerk because we had forwarded the agenda package and the regulations to the town clerk last week on Friday, asking her to distribute to the RTM. So I just want to double check on that, because I remember one RTM member had said they had not received the package. So I just want to kind of follow up on that. If people, abutters, have interest in getting the package agenda emailed to them in the future on this, if they could send an email to either Deb Jones or myself, we are happy to include them on the list of that. Our email addresses are on the town's webpage, jreiner, R-E-I-N-E-R, at groton.ct.gov, or djones, Jones, at groton-ct.gov. So if somebody, people wanted to send either of us an email asking, we can email out the packet and future packets. While we're going through this just kind of workshop discussion, it was not the intent to be mailing things out to all of the abutters. I think when Deb was talking before about what we would normally do, that's when we have an actual application. And that right now, it's the intent to get some discussion and feedback from the commission. Once we take this to a formal application, that doesn't mean anything's done. That starts the formal process to get public input. And that's why that public hearing comes in. And again, that's just on the regulation piece. So, we want to be open and transparent through this. And that's why we're bringing, this information forward at this point in time.
Does anyone on the commission have anything to add? The
I
staff?
think it's difficult to be open and transparent when people don't know about it. And I don't know, giving out emails, how many people are on the line, but it's probably a handful of other than commission and consultants. So I think we need to go overboard in this and make sure people really know about it from the onset. That was always the intention as being part of a community, is to not do things that are not well known to the rest of people. One thing I'm concerned about is the design standards in general. Looking at some of the things that are being built or have been built recently, it'd be great to really up our game in that, I think. You've got certainly apparently some decent historical buildings, and I do look forward to the tour to see them again. But it'd be really nice to do something good here rather than just the same, 90-degree angle stuff that looks like any suburban Atlanta type development. So that's all I had.
Did you have anything else to add, Deb?
No, just to reiterate what John said, we're happy to answer questions. Town hall is open, so you can certainly stop in and talk to us or give us a call or an email. And to Sue's point, we will come up with a strategy to get notifications out for these workshops as well as when we actually have an application.
Thank you.
Maybe you can get the New London Day to put a little article in or something.
I'm happy to reach out to the reporter at the Day tomorrow. She's always been very good about putting some stories out there just to help get the word out that, we've started this process.
Yeah, it might be a good idea, just to get people informed. If no one has anything else, then make a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? Is it seconded?
Second, Jeff, Kevin.
I didn't hear anything, so, all right. Thanks for everybody participating. I thought it was gonna be end a little earlier than it did, but it got a lot done.
All right, good night, everyone.
Good
Good
night.
night, everybody. Thank you. Thanks for the feedback.
Everybody.
Yep.